Okay, perfect. Um, okay. Chair for panel 1, you will be moderating this. So over to you, Collins.
All right, thank you, Faye. Hi everyone. Please, am I audible? Am I audible enough?
Yes, you are, please.
Awesome. All right. Hi guys. My name is Collins Undelikwo. I'm going to be the chair of panel 1 for this round, and I'm going to be moderating proceedings. All protocols will be observed. Before we proceed, please just give me a second. Yeah. Okay. So, can my panelists please introduce herself, Imole, and then we proceed to panel 2 so that they could introduce themselves as well. Imole.
I think she just dropped off the call.
Okay. Panel 2, are you guys there?
Yes. Hi everyone. My name is Tiwalade, and I'm happy to be here again. We can start the debate after Francisca introduces herself.
Yeah, hi. This is Mansa. I'm panelist for panel 2.
Awesome. I think we should just give Imole like 2 minutes. But before that, I wasn't available yesterday, but I'm pretty sure it's been an amazing tournament so far. Looking forward to hearing amazing speeches. Please, when you start your speech, state your POI preference. Respect to speakers' POI preferences. Let's have a very I don't need to say this, but let's have a very engaging round. I'm looking forward to it. Can someone try to reach out to Imole? Faye, please help. If you could just reach out to her so she could get back in as well, because she would.
I'm here now.
Oh, awesome. Imole, you have something to say to the speakers? Introduce yourself too as well.
Oh, hi. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm really grateful, especially those that got caught on a very short notice. This is going to be like a fun round, so I hope everyone enjoys themselves. Yeah, thank you.
All right, awesome. Imole, could you please help me time? Do you have could you help me like time maybe on the chat space if possible?
Yeah, that's no problem. That's
awesome.
Okay.
All right, thank you. So yes. All right. So we call the Prime Minister to kickstart this round on the motion we already know. Says this House believes that all religious positions, example heads of religious organizations, local community leaders, etc., should be directly elected by their followers. Here. Prime Minister, the floor is yours.
Oh shoot, I forgot how to find this. Okay. Okay. I hope I'm audible, guys.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Setting my timer, sorry.
Yes, you are.
All right, so oh no, okay, that wasn't more than one paper. There's just 3 papers, 1 for the motion and 2 for the gibberish. I'm going to speak. All right, so starting my speech now. At the top of today's debate, we need you to understand that religious groups, just like institutions, seek to maximize a couple of things. I think one, the goal is to be able to get a lot of buy-ins for the idea that they are a going concern, and then they want to ensure that there is continuity of their existence, to be able to push their doctrines, to be able to widen the scope of their reach. But two, I think that it's also important that they don't only get the buy-ins, but there's constant growth, and that comes at the back of avoiding things like antagonizations, avoiding things like tensions, especially from their, what I'll call the fan base or their membership, because that's where the most likely tensions are going to come from. But I think the last thing is that when they get growth in all aspects, spiritual growth and the environment to be able to thrive, they also ensure that they have a bulk of sustenance, because they will be able to, the idea of being able to get their going concern is quite important to them as religious institutions. We therefore think that for practices that are within the reach of religious institutions, they do not need to be anti these actions. And once we prove that these are likely to be harmed or hurt out of the fact that their current political structures or their current voting structures do not fit that, we think that OG makes sense and wins this debate. The first thing I'll be arguing to you is on the idea of representation. Three things to note here. First is that on representation, the dogma or history that religious institutions were mostly rooted on were mostly that of discrimination in a lot of instances. And the reason why you would need to believe that is the idea of why now, secondly, religious doctrines have now evolved to now embrace more of what their followers think, i.e., Bannerman's Adventists used to not want a lot of women involvement. And Bannerman himself thinks that women need to be involved. But it's anti what the actual religious institution wants. But so that's how stuff like discrimination and racism, etc., were conventionally rooted in religious institutions. But currently, we have a lot of institutions, a lot of these religious institutions now evolving to be able to accept what their followers want because of the base that the followers have reading religious institutions. So religious texts, even though conventionally are more are more maybe biased towards certain institutions, now interpretations are now made to suit what religious followers want. So it causes things like a widening of access at various levels in that regard. The point of this is to prove that the change of things like what people vote for and which people vote for spiritual leaders is still in line with what religious institutions do anyways in current times. So it wouldn't be a bad thing. What we need to prioritize is the trade-off that is creating here, because we think that when there's a push for all individuals to now vote, what you do is that there's more representation of the diverse opinions of the growing the growing diverse interest of their growing institutions or their growing membership, because we don't think that religious institution followers or followers of religions now have monolithic ideas anymore, i.e. because of globalization, liberalization, and a whole lot of conflicting outside world issues that people are more socialized into in current times. We think that is the goal of religious institutions then to be able to evolve to meet up these things at every point in time. That's why we think that one thing like voting is one that people now have more subscription towards, and then people want to be a part of, especially when in such a context, these religious followers know that they have a greater stake when it comes to the religious institution. That speaks to the first idea of buy-ins, because the idea of buy-ins is to say that you don't only sustain the people inside, but you create more leverage for other people to be able to come in. It makes more sense for something like voting now to be widened across every other person, especially when religious institutions are seen to be irrational. Now, we don't even understand why we are the ones giving more money to religious institutions, but certain individuals need to be the ones voting, when we clearly as government, in our current systems, in our various political institutions, we are the ones that vote directly, and we don't only allow people to vote. I don't think that's difficult. It's not especially difficult when models like allowing denominations to choose leaders at various levels, and then doing a greater congregation for these denominations leaders to also vote in turn. Like, these things are models that can exist. So people will not make sense as to why we are still going by the old doctrines where certain spiritual leaders are the ones supposed to do that. Let me take Tayo.
Please, before you go for that, in your world, how do you determine the followers who vote?
Yeah, so I think the model here, it's simple. Like I was saying, you can always allow every voter to vote. Everyone can vote. Religious institutions have the funding because the followers are the ones that vote. So we can start from various denominations at various countries. We vote congregations. We choose what do you call it? We have the elections. There are coalitions. There's technology. I can personally create a system for the religious institutions to collate their votes so easily. I don't think these are things that are very, very difficult. Everyone can vote. We can create systems for the voting to be easy. Bannerman.
Yes, so Franco, if you want these changes to happen, don't we already have systems like meetings within churches, for instance, that allow for your grievances to be heard? Why is this different?
Why is it also different to allow people to vote then if they make decisions during meetings? Because we think that voting is the direct mandate we give to authorities. So saying things at meetings is not enough. But now having the opportunity to now decide who actually is the voter, who actually is the leader, who uses our funds is the important. I think the second argument answers this legitimacy. We think that leaders are custodians of not just the spiritual custodians, but also custodians of revenue that's or taxes or tithes that religious institutions get. These monies come directly from directly from followers. We think that on the principal level, where it is part for individuals who give the biggest stake of a going concern to be the ones to decide who even controls this. Because we think that the very moment these religious institutions feed at the back of these monies, they now need to give the individuals a choice to choose who uses them, and then that creates more accountability. Because in current systems, there's only reward systems that like you go to heaven, that's why you need to vote. That's why you need to pay taxes. People really don't have a choice when it comes to that. We think we rationalize the idea of now paying taxes, etc., and gives more leverage to religious institutions because they are the ones that followers, because they are the ones that they pay more money to religious institutions at the end of the day. We think in today's debate, it's more about the idea of rationalization and giving a reason for people to constantly give money to religious institutions because they are the ones that fund these religious institutions, and accountability needs to be directly through them, not just through giving your concerns through meetings or making some suggestions that will not be heard at the end of the day.
Yeah. Thank Prime Minister for that speech. We then invite leader of opposition to present the case for opening opposition. Yeah. Hello.
Good afternoon, everyone. Please confirm if you can hear me.
Yeah, you're audible.
Awesome. So when does the time start? How do I know when to go ahead?
Yeah, you could just count yourself down 3, 2, 1, and then you begin. And once you start, so we're going to time you.
Okay. Well, 3, 2, 1, go. So first of all, I think it's important for us to understand religions, right, and understand how religions work. In today's world, people are free most of the time to decide that they want to be adherents to a particular religion. We know that religions generally require, in most cases, submission, the acceptance that there is God, there is a higher power, and also the acknowledgement of the place of leaders and intercessors, people like pastors, people like reverends, people like the Pope, for instance, as living intercessors. And also you can look at it in the case of other religions as well. So, and I think this is important to note because at the end of the day, right, when you decide that you want to foist a democratic process, right, on religions, whereby in the current form, people have willingly and voluntarily have decided that they are fine with whatever selection model of whatever religion that they have opted into, then it becomes an issue and fundamentally changes the nature of religion. Say, for instance, you have a religion like, for instance, Islam that is not so democratic, that has maybe a Shura council, and then as a result, the government has decided now you have to start voting. It fundamentally alters the religion and changes it in the way in which people who have opted to that religion would eventually will show you, obviously, in other points or in successive points, how this itself would lead to the trivialization of religion. But my second point is, and also related to that is that how do we determine eligibility of followership? When we asked this question to the Prime Minister in Tayo's PO, he said that anybody who says is an adherent to the religion can vote. That is problematic because we know that religions or people who are adherent to a particular religion are at different spiritual levels. So we know that somebody, for instance, might claim to be a Muslim, for instance, but also could do things that are not exactly aligned to the values of Muslims. So drinking, smoking, fornication, for instance. So the question is, should anybody who just decides to become a particular religion adherent, right? Say, for instance, I decide I'm a convert, for instance, tomorrow I'm a Christian. Does that automatically give me the right to be able to influence and start to participate in the religious process to the extent whereby I now can decide who is going to be the leader of that religion? And we say no. Even today, where you have democratic aspects to some religions, there are always safeguards and internal processes that have been put in place to ensure that the right set of people, as determined by the criteria of whatever religion, are the ones who come to bear in that instance. So take for instance the Shura Council in Islam. Take for instance the cardinals and the Holy See in the Catholic Church. Third thing is we think that this would eventually lead to the death of pluralism in religion. So religion generally tends to allow people from different races, different countries, different nationalities to be able to come together under one unified banner. What happens when you decide that that population is now the determinant, right? Or democracy is now the determinant? What you then see is a domination of any religion sect by people who are of the highest number, right? So where you have the majority, the vast majority of people. So what that then becomes is that, say for instance, in the Catholic Church case, where over time you have church and people from different nationalities, when it becomes a thing of voting, you can just expect that very soon you will see your first Chinese pope, and over time, maybe for the next 5 to 10 years, you would have the leadership of the Catholic Church dominated by whatever place has the highest population, because they would definitely want to see someone like them in place of authority. And on the last hand, right, we start to think about how this is going to tribalize religion at the end of the day, because you start to see scenarios where people have to campaign, people have to tailor their image, tailor their ideology to appeal to different bases, because it helps them to achieve the prestigious positions that these religions authorities or these religions have. So say for instance, I know that, for instance, homosexuality is not a value of Islam, but then I would decide that, we have a lot of rise in LGBT, and I want to appeal to this particular base, and as a result of that, I want to start to tailor and change the acceptability so that people can as a vast majority of people can then start to buy into different bases. And I believe that at the end of the day, what is going to happen is that it starts to lead them to trivialize and water down religion. Franco, I'll take your POM.
Yeah, so the idea of whoever is going to vote, it might not necessarily be a religious doesn't vote, because religions already have systems to check membership, etc. We didn't even think those was going to be a part of the debate, because like current systems now knows who exactly is a lead, a follower, and who is actually a true religious person. I don't think this should be part of the debate anyways.
All right. So in your best case scenario, right, what you have is that the religion has already selected certain people, right, who are going to be the ones who are going to lead. And as a result of that, it's not the democratic process at the end of the day, and all adherents themselves are not allowed to vote. And I guess this will be a separate world, which is more aligned to our own world, whereby whatever the practices of the religion itself is allowed to hold. And we don't elevate one particular selection model over the other, or allow people to be able to externally capture the religion, because that's what also happens, right? It means that if tomorrow we decide that, we want to say lead the Redeemed Christian Church of God, all we need to do as an external religion is fulfill whatever criteria that the RCCGG has for its membership, and allow our members to flood this religion and eventually elect the leadership. And eventually it then becomes religion just becomes another place where people go and foster whatever interest that they have on whatever long-term objective that they are trying to achieve. And we believe that at the end of the day, what best serves religion is where there is no single selection process, where all religions have the choice to determine how exactly they want to select. And at the end of the day, we're not saying that normal societal law should not exist, right? So you can still arrest religious leaders for committing fraud, for doing whatever it is that is wrong. But at the end of the day, we still believe that every religion should have the freedom of selecting its model, and should be able to select their leaders in a way that they continue to deem fit. And I am very proud to be opposing this motion today. Thank you.
All right. We thank the leader of opposition for that speech. We then invite Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case for opening government. Here. EPM.
Okay, give me a sec. I need to arrange my sheets. Okay.
Andrews, can you hear me? Yeah, you're not muted.
Oh, I think I
Yeah.
was muted as well. Sorry. All right. So I'll take POIs in the chat. Feel free to drop yours there. I'm going to begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. I just want to point out that religion would exist regardless of what we decide to do on both sides. So the key question is, in which world do we make religion a more humane experience and a much more accountable institution to the people who commit their lives, their resources, their finances, and their time to building the very institutions that the leaders lead? So I'll prove this in 2 ways. Franco has already done a lot of work on this in terms of representation for minorities within these religious groups, and secondly, the level of accountability that religious organizations currently hold. But this mechanistic quibble about voting systems, let's talk about it. First, the papacy recently voted for the Pope. The only difference is there were a set of cardinals who went to vote. The only thing we are saying is open it up to all eligible members to be able to vote. That level of freedom that opening opposition wants can be given to a certain degree. So for instance, religious institutions will be able to draw which voters vote for which degree of elections. Same thing we have with like national elections. For instance, it's only parliamentarians who are able to vote for who is becoming the Speaker of Parliament, but all of us can go and queue and vote for the president. There are various levels of voting structures that can happen, but the fundamental principle is that voting should be extended to every single member on the fundamental level, and that should exist. Voting in itself, by what the papacy does, which is, mind you, like the Catholic Church voting for the Pope, is the most powerful, the most wealthy religious institution that you have in the world. It tells you voting is not anti-religious, with the exception of probably the Jehovah's Witness people who think that voting is a bad thing and so they don't vote. But that's a very fringe section of religious people. So the case from up cannot be that voting conflicts with spirituality. Therefore, you can never allow religious institutions to vote. The key difference is simply extending it to most people. Secondly, what happens, like what the papacy does, is to view the voting process as being overseen by the religious deity or the spiritual deity that that religion believes in. Therefore, they view that religious deity as being in control of the voting process. And that's how they marry voting with spirituality. So it is not something that cannot coexist. It's just that religious leaders know that it is not in their interest for various reasons to create impunity, to not be accountable to the people. They don't want to initiate it, and we think that should be aborted on our side. Thirdly, who can vote? That's a very silly question. Religious organizations know who they want to go to for tithe, but then when it comes to who can vote is where we draw the line. They know who they want to collect offerings from, but when it comes to who can vote is where we draw the line. That's a very ridiculous comparative to set. For every person whom they go to request financial responsibility from and request a membership responsibility from, those exact same people should be allowed to vote. This debate can be about a practical impossibility, and also debate has evolved from that. So we cannot have a debate about we can never determine who would vote. Yeah, then end the debate and award it to opening up and closing up, and let's stop it. Thirdly, voting itself is a very demanding process. So mostly there's a natural selection thing, like people who do not care about the country do not go and vote. That's why voter apathy always exists. Like in Nigeria, when people are voting there, I know a lot of people who would say that they don't care, the country doesn't benefit them, so they will not go and vote. Why? Because voting is demanding. People have to sacrifice their time. People have to go and queue. People have to show certain level of commitment in order to go and vote. The act of voting itself is a validation of commitment, which means that there's a certain filter that it carries, such that fringe members usually do not see it a necessary thing to go and do it. And so most likely the majority of people, don't misquote me to say everyone, I said the majority of people who are likely to go and vote are people who care deeply enough about the religion and are committed deeply enough to it. First, let's talk about representation for minorities. Franco already tells you there's a significant level of opportunity that's opened up for these minorities to also contest for leadership positions themselves and put themselves at the forefront of these discussions. But more importantly, note, because they become voting blocks within these religious organizations, even if they are not the ones actively going for these positions, they become influential voting blocks, which means that people have to discuss how they are going to integrate them into the church and create opportunities for them. So for instance, you compel male Catholic leaders to discuss how they are going to integrate women who have been consistently sidelined within the Catholic Church. That form of compelling behavior does not exist on their side. This is what creates the systemic opportunities for these women to create discourse, for these minority groups to leverage that priority that they are getting within the voting process to create systemic change. That does not exist on their side. So there are people, mind you, imagine if it was a state and the state taxes you, takes your time, takes money, dictates a lot of your moral behaviors, yet you have zero means of influencing the decisions of that state. We would all say that state is immoral, and we all call those states very authoritarian and satanic states. For some stupid reason, when it comes to the church, it's moral and it's okay. We think that has to be stopped and it has to be evolved. Tayo, before I move on.
Do you believe that we should impose a female pope on the Catholic Church?
I think females should be allowed to vote for a female pope. That's the debate. Secondly, let's talk about accountability. Religion compels believers to give lots of money. So for instance, religion tells you your blessings are tied to money. And so if you believe in that religion, which most people, mind you, like opening up says most people actually believe in religion by choice. Like there are very few people who believe in religion by choice. A lot of us were born into it, indoctrinated into religion by our families, by our ancestors, by lineage. We were beaten when we opted out not to go to church. We were coerced and physically abused just to fall in line with the religious lines of the family. So no, it is not that. But when we got in, we were whitewashed. We were indoctrinated into believing that our blessings, our financial success is tied to committing heavy financially to the church. So give 10%. Even the state doesn't take 10% of your earnings. But we say give 10% of your earnings to the church, because if you don't, God is not going to bless you. Your family is not going to be successful. We coerce people. There's also a level of shame that comes with offertories, that if everyone is giving and you are not giving, you feel that you are not being able, you are not committed enough, and you feel a certain level of shame. All these things create very structured, systemic, and coercive systems that religion uses to collect money from people. It is very difficult to opt out, unlike what they make you believe in. So debaters are not the best judges of religious people, so don't believe them. Because the most religious people, like you see online, they are very, very dogmatic. The recent Charlie Kirk thing tells you that religious people would sacrifice anything, any form of logic, to believe that their religion is right. What this means is that you have a religious setup that is usually very strict and dogmatic as much as the state taxes people. If there was a state that taxed people without giving them a system of influencing that position, would say it's principally unjustified. It fixes financial abuse within a lot of these religions, and it compels leaders to be accountable in prioritizing to give youth scholarship as opposed to buy Papa a new car. That's bullshit. We should obviously oppose such a system.
Yeah. We thank Deputy Prime Minister for that speech. We then invite Deputy Leader of Opposition to continue the case for opening opposition and to bring the top half to a close. Here. DLO.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you're audible.
Right. Sorry, let me just put on my timer. Right. So, panel of the House, right? The reason why Andrews is trying to run away from this debate is because of what the other world looks like. This debate cannot happen unless we have the world where the state, who is supposed to be neutral in most cases, gets into the arena of making sure that the preferred method, which is election, right, is endorsed and implemented by all religions, regardless of their doctrinal beliefs, right? And the biggest justification for that is that it leads to accountability within that religion. The reason why that is rubbish is because elections in and of themselves don't lead to accountability, right? If you think about it critically, what elections do is have a popularity context about who is able to appeal to what you refer to as the masses, right? And that can vary. Like the concept of appealing to the masses means that you're fundamentally undercutting what religion stands about, because it then becomes who is able to convince the most people, not necessarily who is able to fulfill the tenets of those religion, right? Who is able to, entrench the tenets of those religion and have people follow them if they believe in them. And if people don't believe in them, they can go away, right? So the first thing we have in today's debate is, how, voting, religions accommodate voting. So voting is not inherently bad in some religions. That's fine. This debate is about where the religions don't, because that clash of principles, as Ahmed tells you, is where the problem, and that's clash of principle. First off, the state has no business in it, and secondly, has deleterious consequences even for the religion itself. The second thing I really need to clarify is that Ahmed's point about who gets to vote is not a practical quip. It is a fundamental principled question, and there are two responses we've got. Is either you use a metric, and when you use a metric, you would have inclusion versus exclusion. You would have people who you believe are not Christian enough to vote. You have somebody you believe that is not a redeemer enough to vote. You have somebody who you believe is not Muslim enough to vote, right? And you have somebody who you believe is. So that sort of thing leads to sectarian politics and and increases the probability of sectarian violence. I'll talk more about that later. Secondly, the other thing they said is, okay, everyone gets to vote. Immediately you identify as a Christian or as a Catholic, you get to vote. That in itself is also problematic, because when people know that, and they know that that threshold does not make sense, all I need to do, if I know that there's an election in a Catholic church next year and I want to qualify, is to convert to Catholicism, right? If you're not going to scream it, there won't be a metric for you to determine who is a follower of a religion and is qualified to vote, right? Even in the real world, we say people under the age of 18 don't get to vote because we don't believe that they are qualified enough in terms of mental capacity to vote. So in both worlds, right, in that sort of even determining who is a follower of a religion, right? Because of what religion does is that it's an umbrella term. It admits of some core followers. It admits of pluralism. If you damage pluralism, it's going to be bad for the world, and you're not going to have the kind of accountability that you think you would have. Why is this? Because the truth is that elections harden identity values, right? When you have election, you have sect. It is me against them, and somebody has to win. That in itself is bad for religion, right? Currently, right, in your churches, in your mosques, you have people that are not, there are people here who drink and call themselves Muslims, right? If you have to separate them and say this is a true Muslim, this is somebody who should decide, or this is somebody that belongs to our community, this is somebody who does not belong to our community, that sectarianism is bad, right? The other thing is that if you have to enforce this using state mechanism and make sure that religions have periodic, free, fair, and credible elections, you're inviting the state into the arena. When you invite the state into the arena, they can weaponize it, right, to remove dissenting clergies and men of God that do not necessarily, speak to what they like. That sort of power, we do not like it, because in today's world, what happens is that the religion and the people who conscientiously believe in the religious values, submit to the will of God, to the will of their religion, and to the will of their religion processes, right? The other thing I wanted to talk about before I move on is to imagine a world where I want us to think about this in the kind of like CSR activities that religions carry out, like mission schools, like hospitals, and how they distribute it across places. Imagine a world where the person who has to make those decisions has to be elected, right? It would mean that everything that is problematic with our democracy in today's world, we invite it into the arena of religion. Remember, we do not need this to have accountability, and that's the point we make very clearly, right? If it is accountability is your problem, there are other ways, right? If you fundamentally damage what a religion considers as divinely ordained way of choosing a leader, then you invite problem into the arena, right? The other thing that these guys tell you is that you protect minorities, right? And then, in fact, if they don't win, because you consider that you will not protect minorities because minorities will not win. Democracy is not about protecting minorities because majority carries the day, The thing they've said is that, well, you turn them into influential voting blocks, right? And we say that, I mean, that influential voting blocks itself that people get to consult is rubbish, because what it does is to lead to marginalization within religion and call these people minority who they would never rule, but you only turn to them for political reasons and make them puppets. I would take CG if they have any POI.
Fire on.
Andrews, go ahead.
You basically created an argument about statehood for OG and rebutted it yourself. But also, religion behaves like a state with a spiritual backing. If they behave so, they should be allowed statehood-like accountabilities. You do not simply say we are religious.
So there's a burden here, right? And I think your CG does better. There's a burden here. Having elections alone does not lead to accountability. Accountability is gotten by oversight. Accountability is gotten by institutions, that separation of powers, all of those things that you don't have in religious spaces today. Just having an election alone does not mean that somebody who you elect to be accountable. We've seen it. Like, are you not in wherever you are? Have you not seen that even when somebody is popular and the state elect them, they end up not being accountable? What sort of a strawman argument is that elections lead to accountability? Now, the final thing they say is that there's no choice, right? Because it is difficult to opt out, right? Which is I think it's a very ridiculous argument, and judges don't buy it, right? It's the same way we only allow people who are 18 and above to vote, right? There's so many types of religion now that truly, right, if you really want to opt out of a religion, you can. There are many there are probably converts on this call. But more importantly, how is this a problem solution mismatch, right? You think that it's difficult to opt out of a religion, so what you want to do is to damage the fundamental tenets of those religions. That is not just commensurate. That is a problem solution mismatch. Like, that was not, I don't even know how that solves the problem, right? There would always be imperfect choice making mechanism, but we know that when people submit to religion, they don't submit it for logical reasons. They don't submit it because they think their father would listen to their father in the Lord would listen to them, or their father in law would take into accountability what they think. They submit because it is divinely ordained and they believe that religion conscientiously would work for them. We're proud to oppose this bullshit proposal. Thank you.
All right. We thank the deputy position for that speech. It brings the opening house to a close. We then invite member of government, MG.
Yeah. Am I audible? Can you guys see me?
Yeah, you're audible and visible.
Oh, shit. Sorry. Okay. So I'll just start in 3, 2, 1. So, panel, the reason why we're having today's debate is because of how the concept of religion itself and why it is very different from like any other thing you know. Because what I thought OO was going to actually argue for in today's debate was to argue for why, since the religion is not really a state and it's more or less like, let's say, private business, then it doesn't have to like be put on that particular pedestal, which is going to be very, very hilarious, because we think religion or religious bodies in the vast majority of instances do not even want to be regarded as like private property, right? Because they're not private property. They treat them like private property, because if you look at the vast majority of like churches or like mosques, etc., that we have in today's world, they treat them like private property. But when you speak to like the leaders of these religious groups, they try to refrain from the fact that they are private property. They are like, oh, we were sent from God. Like, you know, we don't pay taxes because, you know, of this and that. You know, we are serving the public, you know, the reason why they have all of those missions, all of those things, right? But when it comes to how the church is run, it's literally run like a private property, right? Oyedepo literally has like an autocratic rule over like his church, and vast majority of the GOs run their churches in that particular manner. What we think is that it creates like a dichotomy of interest, right? When these things are useful, they run them like public property. But when these things are useful, they run them like private property. But when it comes to actual accountability to like the people that they serve, then they run them like private property. We think that in itself creates like a very, very big imbalance. And OG does a very good thing when they use the Catholic Church example. Like they vote for the Pope, for example.
Like that's already open, right? So we don't think every church, for example, is going to like follow the same model. Everybody has like, the kinds of like democracy that they practice within like their own spaces, and we're actually very, very proud to have that. Couple of responses before we go to our main matter. Two responses. First is they say like it alters like the religion. And the thing about religion is, as much as religion wants you to actually believe that it is rooted in dogma and doctrine, doctrine is actually quite flexible, right? Because in the vast majority of instances, anyone who studies history very well knows that a lot of things have been introduced into religion that we kind of consider sacred today. But if you read into it, you just like, just one man came and said, this is how I want it. And somehow, it all became doctrine. And, the fact that you even have split sects within like particular religions, points to that particular fact. The fact that you have like the Church of England that is separate from the larger Catholic Church was based on somebody feeling like, I want to marry like a wife, like I want my priest to be able to like marry wives, and I don't like what they're doing at the Catholic Church. And they took that particular decision. That decision today is dogma, but like it's something that happened as a result of what they wanted at that particular point in time. So we don't really think the dogma thing is not that flexible. We think it's actually quite flexible. And we really don't see a world where the majority shouldn't be able to say, like, because the kind of example that you get from when they say, do you want a Chinese person to become the Pope? Yeah, we want Chinese people to become the Pope. Like, if Chinese makes up the vast majority of Catholics in the world, then they should be able to produce a Pope, because the vast majority of the world right now literally runs, most popes have been Italian, for example, and Christianity didn't even start from Italy. It means there is an obvious power imbalance in the Catholic Church that we think these kinds of like systems can actually correct. That is the topic of today's debate, right? So let's talk about like a couple of things that we hear, like that we say to you from closing government. What we say is that still on the topic of the accountability, because OO seems to have like a very big problem with the accountability thing. Accountability is actually very, very crucial, because in the current system, the checks and balances that they actually do talk about still subserves like the people to like the whims and the caprices of these daddy GOs who are literally autocratic, right? It's only if your proposal appeases the daddy GO, that is when the accountability can happen. But on our side of the house, we don't necessarily need to appease the daddy GO before the accountability can actually happen. We can vote you, and if you actually do mess up, we will actually vote you out at the next voting cycle. But right now, accountability can only happen when you have like massive protests, for example, or when a very huge chunk of the church threatens to actually break away from the church. Those are the areas where you have accountability in their world. But in our world, we think churches are a lot more sustainable when we can just relax and let this fool play out its term and vote in another person, right? We think that is a lot better on our side of the house. And on our side of the house. And they say something as well. They talk about how, anyone can just join a church if they see that the Catholic Church is voting next year, I'll just go and join the Catholic Church. We don't think it runs that particular way. And even if it runs that particular way, if me, for example, I'm Muslim, right? And I say, I want to influence what happens in the Catholic Church. Then I go and join the Catholic Church today. What's the likelihood? What are the odds that who I am voting for or what I am voting for would be able to sway like millions of Catholics around the entire world, as somebody who just reverted into Catholicism and would be enough to like sway like the vote? Just one man who just became Catholic 6 months ago. Okay, let me take you here.
There's a fundamental principle clash that you guys are not addressing, right? Clerical authority is not about doing what the people want. It's about doing what God wants through that religion. It's not like you as a pastor, a good pastor should not be popular. That's what I'm telling you.
Okay, this is the thing. First, it doesn't work that way, honestly. And that's why I said in the beginning that it works that way because the pastors actually want you to believe that. If they want to change things for their own sake, they would actually change them and tell you they were inspired by God. This is the point. And that's why I told you, when the Church of England, for example, broke away from like the Catholic Church because the King of England wanted to marry like more wives, or he wanted his priest to marry, of course he called it like divine stuff, right? That's the point of today's debate. Like, don't be swayed by those kind of like things. The voice of the people can also be the voice of God. Like, that's the point of today's debate, right? Not only the voice of the clerical staff, the voice of the people can also be the voice of God. Like, the church has to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the voice of the majority is the voice of Satan. If they can't do that in today's world, then democracy stays. Like, this is the point of today's debate, and they can't prove that, right? Because we are talking about like religion here. They cannot prove that. And in a world where they actually do want to prove that, what they actually buy for themselves is literally attack the same base that they seek to actually elevate to the, to that spiritual level. We win today's debate from CG. Thank you.
All right. We thank the member of government for that speech. We then invite member of opposition to present the case for closing opposition. Yeah.
Hey guys, can everyone hear me?
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay, I would like timestamps in the chat. That's speaking. Starting in 3, 2, 1. So I'm just going to start by pointing out something that people just don't intuitively realize, probably because a lot of people haven't been to a place of worship in a while here. Religion is already intuitively democratic, not necessarily because you have a regular opt-out mechanism, but because there is diversity within religion that allows you move laterally within that religion. So, for example, if I go to a specific church, I do not like their doctrine. Maybe I do not believe in prosperity doctrine. I believe in maybe more word of faith or some other structure. I am easily able to move from that church to another church with very minimal judgment, because I have not abandoned the religion. I've just merely changed churches. So what that means is, first and foremost, a lot of the mechanisms that exist from opening government with regards to like how churches are or religion is intuitively coercive doesn't work here. But at the same time, it also shows something, that everybody within the churches that they're existing are probably significantly happy with the churches functioning how they function. Notice why this particular context is important. Because at the point in time where there is diversity within most religions and most tenets, where you have multiple people having multiple narratives within that same religion, the churches that are most popular, the churches that are most platformed, are the churches that people most, or the religious centers that are most platformed, are the religious centers that people most agree with already. What that means is that every single argument around inclusivity or trying to get change or adjusting towards change is probably already co-opted by our side in status quo, where change already happens organically, right? But just for more context here, if this is true, why does it mean that a lot of change that government bench wants to see wouldn't happen? Because if people are already happy with their religious bodies right now, even if things and decisions were subjected to elections, things are significantly unlikely to change, and even if they change, they are unlikely to change for good reasons. Why? One, because if the majority is happy, that means under regular democratic processes, the people that are most likely to win those elections are the people that will campaign under the grounds of status quo. But if majority happens to not win, they're going to not win for all the wrong reasons. So, for example, misinformation, financial vote buying, all the wrong influences that don't want to see in religion, because that means it just ruins the religious experience for the average person. At the point in time where this happens, this means a bunch of things. Religions are probably significantly likely to stay the same in their world, and that means that we don't get significant movement across the board. Why is this different in our world? Jibreel, I'll take you through. Yeah, why is this different in our world? Because religious leaders have an intuitive drive to co-opt as many people as possible when their positions are secure. What that means is that because religious bodies and religious structures and churches are much want to grow and they are told to proselytize their religion, they try to continuously find new ways to include people. And oftentimes, newly included demographics are minorities. What that means is that they're not enough to sway votes, but they are enough to oftentimes increase the religion even though they don't cover the widespread. So what that means is that religions have a status quo and incentive to be inclusive. This is, for example, why you see religious bodies like the Catholic Church now saying they are more willing, they are accepting of queer people, not necessarily allowing it, but saying that it will bless you and still pray for you, that God gives you the grace to like live your life and do like live a holy life. These are significant changes that have occurred over time because they want to co-opt and include people. Notice this: if this was subjected to an election in the Catholic Church right now, that particular movement will lose horrifically. Any leadership that campaigns on that particular platform will lose horrifically, because the average Catholic thinks being gay is a sin. There's no point of including them in the church. Let's just keep them out.
The comparative here is in our chance, in our side, where leaderships are a lot more secure. There's an intuitive drive to just include more people because they don't think their positions are under threat. What happens when their positions are under threat? Because they are now contesting for like electoral powers and electoral like positioning. It's just significantly more likely under those particular situations that they are very likely to do things that will objectively win them the election. Things like, for example, being more populistic in religious terms as leaders, saying that they need to defend the faith, protect the status quo, and then this in turn then causes them to get more votes because the more conservative members of the religion, which are oftentimes people that are in the religion, that opt into the religion, and don't want to see that religion change because they are used to those tenets, are more likely to vote for them. What that means is that you created a system that restricts change in the long term because people just want to pander to the majority, a very conservative majority, without even trying to include more people because they think their positions are under threat. Jibreel, your POI.
The evolution of religion at the moment is one where like so many sects just keep going out because they just refuse to like have discussions. Are you fine with like having 1 million sects that are fighting with each other just because they refuse to discuss?
Okay, this comes into my second extension. We increased intra-religious violence. Notice what happens in the status quo. In the status quo, this is what happens. You have multiple sects of religion that are all campaigning their ideologies and what they believe. And then when everybody campaigns their ideologies and what they believe, people go to the sects that they believe in or they opt into based on what they find acceptable to them. Essentially, it's a very functional democratic process. If you don't like what I'm talking about, you move away from my church and you go to the church that you like what they're talking about. It's very democratic. When you try to centralize leadership, when you try to have electoral processes, and then you now have sects particularly communicate and then do elections and then decide what the central ideology is based off those elections, there are now significantly larger possibilities of having people do crazy things and have that fighting you talk about. Very simple reasons why. Because then you tell me the religion is under threat, the faith is under threat, and then if you lose the religion, you have these infidels or unbelievers or people with false doctrine, and for example, apostasy and all those other people take over and then run the particular religion. I then see the need to make sure that particular wrong does not happen. Notice how people are really, really passionate and care a lot about their religions. At the point in time where they see their religions begin to shape and morph into things that are unexpected because of voting processes, rather than religious edicts from a trusted upward source, you are more likely to see pushback, violence, and then significant actions against those particular processes and changes. And that in turn will probably escalate to more inter-religious violence. For example, you have Shia and Sunni contesting for who takes to be the chief imam of Nigeria, and if that goes down into an election, it's going to be guns and bangers. And what you then see in those particular instances is that violence within religions then escalates because there are no sustainable ways to solve those particular conflicts internally. In the status quo, you don't go to the mosque we fought with and you go and opt into those ideologies. Nobody comes and points a gun in your other and says, go to my mosque or go to your mosque. The more popular mosque continues to grow, the less popular ideology just dies up over time. We solve this organically. The entire point of which is wisdom. Thank you.
All right, we thank the opposition for that speech. We'll invite Government Whip to summarize the case for the government. Yeah. Government Whip.
Yeah, in a minute. Sorry. Okay. So starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So panel, I asked Ayafa one question, and that will be the basis where I'm going to like start my conversation on. We think the religion in its core in itself, especially among multiple sects that exist, is that all the different sects believe that what they're doing is principally fine, and the other sect is doing it wrong. I think it's a core part of religion in of itself. I think the rise of sects, technically, like from time immemorial, has always been something that stemmed from absence of like discussion, absence of a necessity to find a unilateral ground to agree on. So when all of these things do not happen, it just leads to guys deciding that, you know what, let me build my own faith. Let me build my own faith. And then they go on with things like that. We don't think it's something that we're fine with. And I'll develop a few cases on that. I'll address a couple of clashes and then go into my substantial. First one is around clerical authority. That's already given one response to these. I'll add to that. As I told you, where clerical authority, Tayo told us that clerical authority isn't necessarily what people want, but then it is what God wants, which is the definition. I think we're very, very fine with how he described it. But then the problem with it is that if a religion can prove that majority of its people are fundamentally not in line with what the God of that religion wants, and we think people within that religion need another God. Like if 70%, 60% of people within your religion are saying that what you're saying God's saying is not what we want to do, or is not what we think God wants to do. We think people in that particular religion need a whole new God. And so like we don't see why people within that circle have problem with majority of people within that religion determining how their life is run, or telling you that, see guys, this is what God wants and this is what we also want. We think that this is just one very simple principle that we can all agree on and then move on from. Next one again that we're going to be addressing around, there's a whole discussion around like political campaigning, people positioning themselves for political leadership, some sort of things like that. First, we think what happens in situations like this is that they then because of politics, basically, they then now exist like much more scrutiny into people's lives, into religious leaders' lives. So if I want to vote for you, I can see that it's possible that you are posturing for me. I now have the responsibility to decide whether I want to choose A, B, or C. Then we do personal scrutiny into all of these guys. I think we're fine with more scrutiny happening in religious leadership compared to whatever we have at the moment, where leaders are literally just selected and people assume that we have consented to their leadership and then they continue to ride us as they want. Second to that, also now they tell us how it's going to trivialize this position and people just do as they like. We think trivialization already happens at the moment, and it's even worse. We have leadership just flaunting money, displaying wealth, living celebrity lifestyles that are not necessarily approved by their people, trivializing their positions, and we are very, very unhappy about that one. Last level of engagements that we'll take care is around state involvement and how they think that states will start to involve in this because of an election and yada yada yada. We think it's worse in their own world. We think what even happens at the moment is that states literally pick religious leaders for you and you can't say anything about it. We think in our own world, even when there is electoral malpractice, we think people will still be fine knowing fully well that they voted for someone and the person lost an election. They feel a sense of responsibility. They feel a sense of ownership in who they have voted for, even if people like that lost. We are fine with that, even if it's minimal engagements that I get. We're happy with that, than not being able to select who leads us, and we are just literally helpless. Omotayo.
The problem with what you guys are saying is that we all currently live in a democracy, and that kind of accountability is not happening. Not to not talk of a religion where there's even an element of dogma. How do you think the accountability will work?
We think democracy that exists right now has proven to be better than our world where democracy did not exist, even though it's not perfect right now. And we are happy with that. It's growth. We should continue to grow. If we replicate that also in religious circle, I think we are fine with that level. And in 20, 30, 100 years time, it gets to be much more better than it is. We're very, very happy with that. What things that you get from Tasaye? So first thing it tells you around how religions grow, typically not necessarily by design, how they grow to become like pseudo oligarchies, mini monarchies, and things like that, where they just grow to have like few leaders, not necessarily by design. But like, even though we're not against this sort of evolution, we think that the same circle that get to preach collective prosperity, inclusion, all of these things, we think implementation of that collective prosperity, collective inclusion, and things like that is where we now want to have these to be done. So if you are preaching collective prosperity, this is the time for us to collectively prosper. I think we need us to also be a part of our collective prosperity, and we are fine with that. At the moment, regions like operate some sort of like voiceless consent mechanism where they assume that their followers implicitly consent to their leadership structure. While this, in principle, is fine, the problem is that in situations where people do not now consent or implicitly to that leadership, what they are faced with is literally horrible. And this is like response to Ayafa and Taya and all of them. When they don't respond, what you get to see are things like internal sabotage. You see a lot of violence within that kind of structure because they literally can't speak up anyway. You see like idea suppression. If you have opposing opinion, you're literally just shut down. And there's no system to get you to like bring up your opinion and then express it. Ultimately, what happens there is ideological irrelevance, where religions grow. If 50-60% of people within religion don't buy what you are saying, in 20-30 years' time, your ideology is definitely going to die, suppressed, or go into oblivion, and we are absolutely not fine with that. Finally, lastly, one thing we'll engage now is where violence is reduced, because it's definitely a big conversation in this debate. Where do we think violence is reduced and how it works for us on our side? Think on our side. We think, in principle, people don't want to change religion. Like, they do not want to change religion or create new sects within their religion. We don't think people wake up with the notion that I want to go and create a sect. No, we don't think that's how it works. So if there are mechanisms that allow people to exist within their religion or within their own sect, make few changes that work, of course, in line with God and then in line with what the majority of people in that circle wants to do. We think people are primarily going to be fine with that rather than creating another religion. We think sects are typically born out of necessity, and in all instances, or in 80% instances, born out of violence. Even if Ayafa takes proof to us that the violence is some sort of secondary, we think it's primary in building sects, and we are in principle against that. We're happy to discuss any day, anytime. Very, very happy to propose.
All right, we thank the government whip for that speech. We'll invite the opposition whip to summarize the case for up bench and to bring this round to a close. Here. Up whip.
Hi guys, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Am I audible? Can you guys hear me? Hi guys, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay. All right. I'm starting. Give me a few seconds. Let me get a timer. Guys, give me a second. I'm trying to get a timer. All right, great. Am I audible? Can I proceed?
Yes, please proceed.
All right, so I'm starting my speech. All right, so panel, what I'm going to do first of all is go through our extensions and show you why we beat out everything in this round. So first of all, Ayafa gives you very important arguments on how this causes more harm as an idea, right? And it tells you this in 3 ways. First of all, it tells you how what you do is you increase intra-religious violence. And panel, currently, what exists in society that reduces the level of intra-religious violence is that we all accept that
the decision that was made, even if it was made by a few people at the top, that decision was made by God. That decision was made by the deity, right? In a world in which you see that each and every person is responsible for the decision made, it means that it is no longer the God that takes the decision, but the people. This means it is more likely for people now to fight, to try to get to the top, to try to resist decisions and all those kind of things. Intra-religious violence is more likely to exist in such a world, right? On your side, you remove the mechanism that exists to remove the ability for those things to not exist, for those kind of religious violence to not exist, and that's why it's bad. Second thing we talked to you about is that people use economic benefits to impact dogma. And panel, this is a very important extension because it touches on a lot of different things, right? What that means is that, and as like OG says, in a world in which someone is, let's say, it's a minority group and wants to say change the dogma, let's say allow for more gay people to be represented in churches, allow for women to be represented in churches and all those things. In developing countries or in places which have like poor socioeconomic situations, if you then promise them money, if you give them money, if you give them food, if you give them resources, you are more likely to buy their votes and you're more likely to win the election. So you win the election and then you change the dogma. What then happens? That change is an unsustainable change because within a few years, people can either kick you out, people can either revolt, people can either say that they don't like this idea, right? In a world in which that change in itself is unsustainable, it becomes a very terrible mechanism you can use to liberate minority groups. It also becomes a very terrible thing for the dogma and the church or the religion itself, because it means that religious dogma is not being influenced by what people actually believe, but is being influenced by money. It's being influenced by resources. So this is bad for both the religious organizations and the minority groups you are trying to help in the first place, which means that in a world in which you use economic benefits to impact dogma, it causes more harm to all parties involved. Then the third extension we give you is how developing countries like are harmed in terms of political like violence. And we think there can be literal political capture of these particular religious organizations. Like in status quo, what happens? In status quo, religious organizations like churches, like mosques, etc., are already a form of voting bloc that political leaders have to appeal to in order for them to win power. That is why you see vice presidents in churches worshiping with them. The next day, you see them in mosque worshiping with them. They are doing all this to court political vote, right? Now, this already is a problem, and it's a because it's already religious lines. It's already divides religions along ethnic and tribal lines because what happens in a world in which now people can then vote is that you allow these political leaders to directly capture these particular churches, to capture these mosques, to use that as a battleground for them to gain influence over religious leaders and gain political power. We think that in itself is harmful to the religions themselves and blurs the lines between the separation of church and state. Notice the argument from opening opposition in this debate was that is there sectarian politics. The government will remove leaders of churches they don't like. That is very different from the kind of argumentation I've given you from Closing. Then let's go to like individual cases and why we beat out OG and then the rest of them. So OG's cases, OG says that dogmas change, which means that religion evolves. So basically, like because religion evolves, we should use this as a way to just get more buy-in, right? The reason why that argument is ridiculous is because one, this kind of change is overwhelming. If every 2-3 years or every 4 years we vote for a new person who comes with a new dogma, and we vote for a new person who comes with a new dogma, that kind of change is overwhelming to a point where people are likely to opt out of that religion. A very good example is American churches who were deemed too woke because they were allowing a lot of trans people in leadership positions. They were allowing LGBTQ things. They were even having pride events at churches, which literally drove away lots of people. It means that in your world, the kind of change, it is true, religion evolves, but the kind of evolution you want to happen through direct voting is too overwhelming and causes harm. I mean, CEO is the only thing that shows you that this in itself is an unsustainable form of evolution. I'll take your POI, Andrews.
Judges, listen to everyone on up. Their debate is built entirely on the very worst versions of voting, like vote buying, tribalistic voting, and stomach voting. None of them engages a functional voting system. Good debaters
Yeah,
engage
so
in
Andrews, okay, thank you, Andrews. So that yeah, can I proceed? So Andrews, the reason why we don't live in Neverland, right? We don't live in some delusional world somewhere. No matter where you are on earth, even in churches, voting is never as principled as you want it to be. Voting will forever be about appealing to blocks and appealing to people in whatever way you want, because even in churches, it's about power, and power comes with getting it no matter what. So, yes, we are arguing the worst case scenario, but then, Pano notes, we also argue the best case scenario. In the best case scenario, the best case scenario is still in reality. In the best case scenario, where a minority group even wins, that is their best case scenario, we still tell you that it's an unsustainable change. Then Ochi goes on to say that, I mean, voting exists today, like to an extent, but the kind of voting you're talking about doesn't like exist in our world, right? Because that kind of voting like is dependent on the idea that the leaders know what they are doing because they were selected by God to choose our leaders. It means you erode the level of mystification that religion comes with and the respect the leaders come with. So that's bad. Now on accountability. No, we say accountability is worsened on like their side, especially from CG, which is their main case. We think it's worsened because you run the church like a state. People then get to allocate resources as they deem fit to groups they like in order for them to maintain power. So your world versus accountability. On our side, we think status quo works well. We think there are levels of change that exist for people to be able to rise like through the system and get organic change and representation. On your side, that does not exist. Proud to oppose.
All right, to thank the opposition way for bringing this round to a close. What was an engaging round? We thank all the speakers. So please just hang around while the judges deliberate. I don't know if there's going to be breakout. But yeah, are you on the call?
Yes, hi Collins. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody. So just give me a minute to stop the live recording, and then I'm going to create a breakout room for the judges. Just to like keep pardon the Chinese. But yes. Okay. Okay, yeah.